On this episode of China Uncensored, a bakery hurts the feelings of the Chinese people. I blame gluten. A Buddhist temple did what? And finally, you say potato, I say re-education camp. This is China Uncensored. Hi, welcome to China Uncensored. I'm your host, Chris Chappell. In our top story, check out these guns. Wait, zoom out. These guns. That was on board the USS Iowa back in 2015. And now, the Trump administration has the Chinese Communist Party in its sights. The CIA has said the US and China are in a Cold War. And so it's apparently time to bring back some Cold War missiles. This week, Trump signed into law the $716 billion defense budget we first told you about when Congress passed it 2 weeks ago. There's a lot in there that seems to be directly targeting China, perhaps literally. One of the things the defense bill focuses on is cruise missile defense, and it names the threat from China as a reason. You see, after the Cold War ended, the US stopped making long-range ship-sinking missiles. I mean, the Soviet Union fell, why would you ever need them? Well, today, China has several supersonic missiles that have a range of 240 miles. The US Navy's Harpoon missile has a range of only about 80 miles. But now, the US Navy has gotten the green light to stick it to China with game-changing new missiles. The US Tomahawk missile has a range of 1,000 miles, but in its current state, it's only designed for land targets. But now, the Navy wants to repurpose it into an anti-ship cruise missile. And with a range of 1,000 miles, compared to China's 240, the Tomahawk missile would be a game-changer. The new U.S. defense budget also focuses on strengthening military cooperation with India, China's largest rival in the region. And it calls for a public report on the Chinese regime's aggressive actions in the South China Sea and Indian Ocean. But that wasn't the only bombshell, or missile shell, that the new defense budget dropped. It also called for strengthening the military and defense relationship with Taiwan, the country that everyone has to pretend is not a country. Needless to say, the Chinese Communist Party isn't happy. Strongly dissatisfied, in fact. You know, with all the times the Chinese regime has said it has hurt feelings, I'm beginning to wonder if it's really just a self-esteem issue. Speaking of Taiwan, Taiwan's president, Tsai Ing-wen, visited the United States this week on her way to Latin America. She had a short stopover in Los Angeles where she gave a speech and met with U.S. officials, and stopped to drink a bubble tea at a local Taiwanese-owned bakery, as you do when you're president. The visit is a sign of warming ties between the U.S. and Taiwan, if you ask American state-run media. But if you ask Chinese state-run media, well, they don't have much to say. I guess they don't want to give much attention to her visit. But a Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson had earlier expressed concern, urging the U.S., quote, not to allow the transit by the so-called Taiwan leader. But in a move that's not petty at all, you know that Taiwanese bakery President Tsai stopped at? Well, it has stores in mainland China too. And now, Chinese state-run media are sort of suggesting people boycott all 538 of them. As you do when you're Chinese state-run media. So faced with a possible boycott, the bakery released a statement saying that they of course support the 1992 consensus that lays out the One China policy. You know, where China and Taiwan both agree there's only one China, but just don't talk about which China that is. And of course, everyone then stopped being angry. Just kidding. Previously, the 85 Degrees Bakery was famous for its sea salt flavored coffee. Now, they're just famous for hurting the feelings of the Chinese people. I just want to stop and say that we live in a world where a bakery has to declare that there's only one China. What is the point of satire anymore? Speaking of Chinese propaganda, the Confucius Institute. The Confucius Institute is a worldwide education program that teaches the Mandarin language with a dash of communist propaganda. That's because it's run by the Chinese Communist Party's United Front, and it's paid for mostly by the Chinese government. Well, guess who won't be adding funding from now on? The Pentagon. The new ban on funding Confucius Institutes on U.S. college campuses is weirdly under the same defense bill as those new missiles. Now, to be clear, The Pentagon never actually funded Confucius Institutes. The Pentagon funds its own language programs at U.S. universities. But then, Arizona State University, which has both a Confucius Institute and a Pentagon-funded language program, had a great idea. Officials at the university bragged about mixing the school's Pentagon-funded Chinese language programs and its Chinese Communist Party-funded Confucius Institute. One Arizona State University official also said that since the Pentagon was funding its Confucius Institute, that proved that the U.S. government didn't see the Confucius Institute as a national security threat, which was not true. Oops! That claim got picked up by Chinese state-run media, and I think you can see what happened from there. So now, U.S. universities have to choose between a Pentagon-funded program and a Confucius Institute. If they want to have both, they have to apply for a waiver, and they can't mix the funds. One issue is that there are more than 100 Confucius Institutes in the U.S., but only 12 universities have Pentagon-funded programs in Chinese. So, if the U.S. government wants to counter Chinese Communist Party-sponsored language programs, it's got a long way to go. Speaking of propaganda, the Chinese Communist Party has been rebuilding a lot of the old Buddhist temples across China, including some of the ones it destroyed in the 1960s. It doesn't mean the Communist Party is okay with religion now. It's not, it never was. But boy, do tourist attractions sure make money. So why not invest in rebuilding some temples? Of course, all the old monks with their traditional ways of thinking have been kicked out, or they died, or were killed. But now, a new, younger generation of monks have replaced them who really understand how to integrate modern communist thought into those stuffy old Buddhist teachings. Like the monks at Yuantong Temple in southern China. They totally get it. That's why, for an additional $73, monks at the temple would perform rituals to guarantee that the deceased will be reincarnated in the United States. Now you might be wondering, why charge so little money? Millions of people want to leave China. They could have charged thousands of dollars. I guess the catch with reincarnation is you have to die first. Of course, the Yuantong Temple totally denies that it ever offered this service. And I believe them, because I read it in the Global Times. Speaking of religion, there's about 10 million people in the autonomous region of Xinjiang who belong to the Uyghur ethnic group, and they're largely Muslim. Well, at least they have a generations-old culture of Muslim customs and traditions and holidays. But believing in Allah, that's very dangerous, according to the Communist Party. And that's why over the last year or so, Chinese authorities have rounded up as many as 10% of all Uyghurs. I'm talking about potentially 1 million people here, and put them into re-education centers. And according to one former inmate, they were forced to drink alcohol and eat pork. That's because pork and alcohol are forbidden for Muslims. But really, bacon and whiskey in prison doesn't sound that bad compared to ideological re-education, physical torture, and mysterious deaths in custody. But don't worry, according to a Chinese delegation to Geneva, there are no such things as re-education centers. No, those places are actually vocational education and employment training centers. But somehow I feel like maybe they're spinning that story because there's another description of these totally not re-education camps, this time from the Communist Party Youth League. They claim that they're actually hospitals, treating people infected with religious extremism, which is very thoughtful since almost no one else in China gets free healthcare. And before we go, normally this is the time I answer a question from a fan who supports China Uncensored through Patreon. But there are other ways to support China Uncensored too. So this time, I want to tell you a story about something amazing that a fan in Indonesia did. His name is Jay. Okay, it's not really Jay, but he didn't want me to use his real name because Indonesia is not exactly a free country. So, last week, Jay messaged us on Facebook about why the China Uncensored YouTube channel was no longer available in Indonesia. And I was like, wait, what? It turned out that Indonesia's biggest mobile phone telecom company, Telkomsel, was blocking China Uncensored. Here's what our channel looks like normally, and here's what it looked like for users on Telkomsel. And this isn't a small issue. Telkomsel serves half of Indonesia, which is the 4th largest country in the world. So more than 100 million people were being blocked from watching China Uncensored on their phones. And that's a big deal because Indonesia doesn't have a good wired internet access in most places, so most people watch YouTube on their mobile phones. So I told Jay I want to do an episode about how Indonesia is blocking China Uncensored. And then he told me that this has recently been an issue affecting lots of YouTube channels there. There's apparently been a big effort by the Indonesian government to block online content related to violence, pornography, and negative content, whatever that is. So I asked Jay to contact Telkomsel and ask them which of their terms of use China Uncensored might be violating. And it turned out, surprise, it was none of them. But here's the bigger surprise. Literally the next day, Telkomsel had unblocked the China Uncensored YouTube channel. In other words, it seems that one phone call from a viewer accomplished something that helped more than 100 million people get access to China Uncensored again. So Jay, my sincerest thank you. You are truly a member of the China Uncensored 50-cent army. And that's it for this episode of China Uncensored. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time. The Chinese Communist Party is buying up influence around the world. That's why this is an urgent call to our fans. If you like how we uncensor China, consider joining our 50-cent army. Go to the crowdfunding website Patreon. If you can, contribute $1 or more to help keep the lights on here. We'll give you some cool perks, and you'll have a chance to ask me questions that I'll answer on air. The revolution is now.